Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue with our panel. The question of Roy Moore, Amy, what's the predicament for Republican leaders?
The predicament is that Roy Moore stays in this race. More stories come out. He comes to the Senate. He wins election. He comes to the Senate. And candidates for re-election, incumbents, continue to have to figure out how they walk this fine line between defending him and also saying, I disapprove of his behavior. But at its core, John, what we are seeing right now is that partisanship, especially when it comes to voters, is a really powerful drug. And they are going to stick with their party over almost anything else. I think that if the shoe were on the other foot, you could also see Democrats finding a way Democratic voters to find a way to rationalize. We just see voters constantly rationalizing, well, this person may not be great, but it is sure better than the alternative, which is the other party.
Right. The pivot from the conversation about Roy Moore to tax cuts. I mean, that's what the...
is a hard one.
That's
we
right.
we want the support of the party to get the thing we want.
That's
yeah.
Right.
And you saw Tim Scott do it. You've seen it, just about every Republican do it. It's all about that right now. The goal is to get it done by Christmas. They've done all they can do on Roy Moore, and so now it's just left up to them to sort out the tax reform issue. The House will take it up this week. The Senate will do it by some point in early December. But I tell you, elements of this are starting to feel like the Obamacare fight over the summer, where they're rushing the timeline. They're not clearly explaining this to anyone beyond their base. You had the Senate Majority Leader this week have to concede that actually, yeah, some people's taxes might go up. Sorry, I misspoke there. You had the economic advisor suggesting that CEOs love this. Well, he seems to forget who he works for, because that guy and an entire party ran against sort of big business and helping them out, although they're going to do it in this case. It just, and there are some really tricky details over when certain tax cuts begin, how you pay for it, and again, the timetable, the idea that this will get done. It just, it's not there yet. And I think they know that, and they get very worried that things like the Roy Moore situation distract from it or potentially derail their ability to get that done.
Jeffrey, let me ask you about on Roy Moore. There's a cultural context in which this is happening, which is in Hollywood, in corporate America, and even in the press. There's a new standard developing on how to take accusations. That standard is not the standard of you must have a total verifiable proof. Right. And what was interesting to me about what Mitt Romney said and Senator Mike Lee said is they said we looked at the evidence, as the Washington Post put it together, and this is the verdict we have rendered. And that's what seems to be, there are a lot of people who are sticking with Roy Moore, but this other thing seems to be different and in connection with this other cultural movement.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, you have a situation in which there's a growing intolerance and welcome intolerance for this kind of behavior and sexual misconduct, and I think you're seeing that. And I think there is a recognition on the part of many Republican leaders that the Washington Post report was very thorough, solid, done by good investigative reporters, and so you have that. On the other hand, I was just thinking about something that Amy said, which is that we have to deal with the fact that he could still, the accusations could get worse, and he could still win and wind up in the Senate. And that's not that odd when you consider that the President of the United States, the current president, survived and won despite self-described, I mean, the Access Hollywood tape, self-described acts of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment. So on the one hand, we do have an intolerance for this across different fields and industries. On the other hand, you could still succeed in America pretty easily with some really nasty stuff in your background.
Well, especially if you believe that the other side is making this stuff up or doing it only for partisan reasons. I mean, this is why so many people are sticking with the party, because they believe that the other side is lying about what really
They're trying to cast the Washington Post as Oppo research, and the Washington Post was actually neutral.
And they
on
also
this.
bring up Bill Clinton, and they said the Democratic Party tolerated this with indiscretions by Bill Clinton. They stood behind him. Amy, the other thing I thought was interesting in this case is that Roy Moore is saying this is the establishment Republicans. This is feeding into an internal debate within the Republican Party.
That's right. This is the great irony of where we are in politics now, is that the establishment has less power than ever. Normally they would be able to find a way to push a candidate like this out or never let them win a primary in the first place. They can't do that now, and yet voters are more partisan than ever. So you have that really big divide, which is they're going to stick with their party, even though the party leaders are abandoning the person who represents the party.
Ed, let me ask you about this week, the elections in Virginia and New Jersey. What do we take away from these?
So I look at one specific area of the country as encouraging for Democrats. I talked to a congressman named Brendan Boyle this week who represents the Philly suburbs. He's actually a loyal viewer of this show. And he kept pointing.
I love him.
Yeah. He looks at Delaware and Chester counties outside Philadelphia. Democrats there won some local and county elections that they hadn't won in more than a century. He said to me, I wondered how much voters would take out their frustration on Trump on the Republicans in their neighborhood. Clearly, they did it. Because of that, he's convinced now Democrats have a far better shot at taking back at least the House next year, because they said there's just too much of that. They ran on economic messages, on local concerns, but the deep-rooted concern and anger with the president is there, and it was enough for Democrats to win in places they hadn't before.
Is that 15 seconds enough for Democrats? Just we're not Trump?
It is enough, except geographically. The question is, are there enough Delaware counties in these congressional districts to flip 24 seats?
Excellent. We're going to have to leave it there. We'll be right back with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Republicans are racing to get tax reform passed on Capitol Hill. The president has said he wants a bill by Christmas. We turn now to one of the president's men working on that bill, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Before we get on to taxes, I want to ask you a question about Russia. You are in charge of carrying out the sanctions against Russia through the Treasury Department for meddling in last year's election. You've sat in the security meetings. How is it possible then for the president to say that he believes that President Putin is sincere when he says he didn't meddle in the last election?
Well, first, let me just say that we are absolutely carrying out the sanctions, and that's something we're very focused on. The president has said that he believes in the intelligence. He's also said that he believes that Putin believes what he said. But it's really time to move on off this issue. I think the president was focused on very important issues such as North Korea and Syria, where we have to get along with and have common goals with Russia, and that's what's really important right now.
But so just so people are clear, there's no ambiguity about this issue from your standpoint in terms of Russian interfering with the elections?
What I'd say is I've seen information. I'm not going to comment on any of the confidential information I've seen. We are carrying out the sanctions. But let me be clear. Nobody thinks this has had any impact on the election. So whatever occurred, there was no impact. So I think the American public is ready to move on to more important issues, tax reform and foreign policy and national security.
Yeah, I just think on the national security front, people think this is an enemy. We should behave with them as such. But let's move on to the question of taxes. The Senate bill came out this week. The corporate tax breaks that are very important to the president don't phase in until 2019. Is that a problem?
Well, let me tell you, the good news is both the House and Senate bill have the absolute same objectives. And I think we're looking forward to this week the House passing the bill. Obviously, we would prefer if they kicked in sooner rather than later, but we're going to work with the Senate on that issue. And one of the things that's very important is even if they don't kick in, expensing will kick in right away, so companies will be able to take advantage of expensing at a higher tax rate. But I'm confident that this is one of the issues that when we get to conference we'll resolve between the House and the Senate.
Is there an economic impact if those corporate tax breaks don't kick in faster? You've suggested it might hurt the market, hurt growth. What's the economic impact if they don't kick in faster?
Well, I commented it relates to the market was actually if we don't get tax reform done. But I'm highly confident we'll get it done, and I think you see that in the market. As it relates to the specific impact of 1 year, we're studying that carefully. Again, there's offsetting effects in both directions.
You went out to California to make the pitch for tax cuts. You met with the Bahnsen Group, a wealth management group. Here's what the CEO had to say in the National Review. The deep challenge in getting tax reform done is that the government spends too much money and no one, including the president, wants to tackle that. What's your response?
Well, that's not an issue we're focused on right now, but we are focused on regulation. We are focused on kind of the 2-for-1, getting rid of 2 regulations for any one. And the president has an executive order that has us looking at efficiencies across the administration.
Here's the worry about not being focused on the debt and deficit is that A, Republicans have been for a long time, so it's curious why they wouldn't be as focused on it in this context. And B is that if the debt and deficit aren't addressed, the growth that you hope will happen won't happen because of the drag on the economy.
Well, the president is concerned about the debt. We've gone from $10 trillion to $20 trillion under the last administration. That's concerning. But our number one focus right now is on growth. If we can create 3% or higher sustained economic growth, that's over $2.5 trillion of additional revenue to the government, $10 trillion of additional revenue to the economy, and that's what's critical to the American public.
So there's obviously a lot of dispute about that growth number, particularly with this drag from the debt, that growth can be achieved. And one of your predecessors, obviously a Democrat, Larry Summers, had some some tough words about those growth assumptions. He said, "I'm not aware of so irresponsible an estimate coming from a Treasury Secretary in the last 50 years. What's your response?
Larry has been quite outspoken as a previous Secretary Treasury. I'd say we have full transparency on the numbers. We have economists that come out. Most of them agree with us. The break-even is 35 basis points for us to have break-even. And I would just comment on the Obama administration, they were projecting 4% and higher GDP. So I find it somewhat amusing now that we're projecting 3%, that all these people who projected higher are coming out and criticizing us.
Let me ask you about wages. One of the theories is that corporate tax rates come down, wages go up because the money is put. I talked to a Trump voter in New Hampshire who said that she believed the president would put pressure on corporations to make sure they turn the benefits of tax reduction into wages. Was that something he might do?
The president and I literally met with thousands of business people on the campaign, and we heard the same thing. Give us a competitive system in terms of taxes and regulation, and American business will compete better than anyone in the world and bring back trillions of dollars and create more jobs here.
But do you think he will weigh in the way he did, say, with Carrier and other companies?
Oh, of course he will.
Yeah. Let me ask you about lobbyists. The president said he wanted to drain the swamp in Washington. What instruction has he given you in putting this package together to keep lobbyists' influence out of the process?
Again, I'm not concerned about lobbyists. We've reached out to many, many trade groups to get lots of input, okay? Lots of people, lots of CEOs have had input into this, but this is all about growth. And this is about an economic program that I've had the opportunity to work with the president since the campaign. And we're focused. We're so excited to get this done and to the president's desk in December.
So no special instructions, though, about lobbyists getting them out of this process?
I haven't had any lobbyists really involved with us. We've had trade groups that we've listened to input, but I'm not concerned about lobbyists at all.
All right, Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for being with us, and we'll be back in a moment. Earlier in the week, we traveled to the Foundry restaurant in Manchester, New Hampshire, and sat down with a small group of Trump voters, assembled with the help of YouGov on the one-year anniversary of the president's election. We wanted to see if he was living up to their expectations. Some responses were as we anticipated, but some surprised us. It's been 1 year since Donald Trump was elected president. Who here, by show of hands, thinks the country is doing better now than it was a year ago? All 6 of you. All right. Tom, why do you think the country's doing better now?
I think the economy's remained strong. I think that's very important. Job growth has been good. We haven't had too many major conflicts internationally yet. There's a lot of things brewing, but overall, I think we've had a stable year, which is good.
Diane, why is this year better with Donald Trump as president?
I agree with most of that, and also I think he's doing a lot of things behind the scenes that most people don't know about, and a lot of them was raising the restrictions to make business more robust, and I think that he is doing something about immigration, but it seems to be very slow.
Would you like to see him go faster on immigration?
Yes.
And what does that mean? Does that mean building the wall, or?
We've all kind of discussed this, and the consensus was we'd like to have all of the illegal aliens go home.
Dina, why do you think the country's better off this year, after a year?
I think that we're fiscally, we're doing better financially. The stock market's going up, but I also think that it's because a lot of things that haven't been put into place yet, like the tax reform.
Who's doing better when the stock market goes up?
Well, everybody ends up doing better when the stock market goes up because it pumps more money into the economy when it comes right down to it. But a strong economy is a strong economy for everybody. It does trickle down. I know a lot of people don't like that trickle down, but it has to come from somewhere. Has it trickled?
Have you felt the benefits of the trickle down either this past year or in general?
No, I haven't.
Who here thinks that Congress is responsible for making things better in the last year? By show of hands.
0 for 6.
Is there a way to show your hands going down? Is there? Who has a particularly? So none of you think Congress is contributing to America in a big? You do or don't?
I don't. I think that they have become so entrenched with each other, and everybody's helping everybody else. They can't get anything done. And it's not Democrats or Republicans, it's every one of them.
Peter, why Donald Trump is a negotiator? Why can't he get Congress to come in line with what he wants?
Well, I think that the way things work in Washington is a lot different than in the business world. I would venture a guess that this is something that Trump has had to adjust to. And it seems like it's been a pretty difficult adjustment.
Terry, what do you feel about people who are in Congress? Should they work for their constituents or work for Donald Trump? If they're Republicans?
They ought to follow their party platform and from whatever stems from that. We have a majority, or the GOP has a majority in Congress, Senate, and the presidency. And they're not working together. And it's shameful. It destroys the party, in my view, and it just creates more independence.
Dennis, what's the most unfair criticism of the president?
That he's a bully.
Why is it unfair to say that he's a bully?
It's how people perceive him. Some people will say he's a bully. Other people will say he's more aggressive or showing his power. You don't get to the level of where he is without some kind of aggressiveness or what people perceive as being a bully. And he's loud and he's obnoxious, and I still like him.
Dina, tell me, who should your kids look up to in our culture?
Right now, there's really not very many people to look up to. What I was thinking is that our society, how it is right now, the divisiveness between the Republicans and the Democrats, Trump supporters, non-Trump supporters, all of the hate that you were talking about, and being sort of flushed into the community. It seems to me like that's a mirror reflection of what's going on in Congress.
Dennis, who's the moral leader in America? Does America have a moral leader?
Right now, no. When I think back, when I was younger, like we look up to Eisenhower. I personally like Kennedy. We really don't have that cut and dried person anymore. When Reagan was in office, people looked up to him. We haven't had that.
As a Trump supporter, though, you're not listing the president in that same category when you name moral leaders who've been presidents.
No, because he's not, I wouldn't say lacking morals, but he's not leading like that, like a moral leader.
Do you think President Trump has helped foster a sense of community in America, or?
Oh, he's made it much worse. I think that any kind of cultural renewal that happens will not be done in any reference to him. This is something that has to happen between people.
In the past, presidents have brought nations together. Why is President Trump, why can't he do that?
Well, he's a funny case. Like he just will lie or like make things up for the effect it has on other people. That's not a way that a good person will live their life. That's what happens when you're trying to defeat someone else, right? And that's what he's trying to do.
So should we, Terry, start looking at our presidents and just take out the being honest, being truthful, the things that we normally associate with presidents? Should we absent that and say, hey, if they're effective, that's okay?
I'm thinking about this, that the president should be a moral and spiritual and intellectual leader for the nation, not for the religious part of the nation or the educational part of the nation, but he's supposed to protect and preserve the country and its laws.
Tom, does the president tell the truth, and if he doesn't, does that bother you?
It does bother me. I think we're a much better nation when people tell the truth. We're a much better community when they tell the truth, and it is very frustrating. It's one of the big knocks on the president is that he can't seem to keep his ego in check and keep the lies under control, and it's personally one of my biggest frustrations with him. He's in a very serious role. He needs to act presidential and step it up. It's been almost a year, and I'm hoping that he'll turn the corner soon, because he's going to start losing even his supporters at some point.
You voted for him. Is your vote up in the air now?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I really thought we'd be further along by now. I thought he would have turned that corner early on, and that hasn't happened. So yes, I am disappointed overall. And it'll be interesting in 3 years or less when we start seeing who's running for office next time.
Dina, do you have any advice for the president?
So I feel like the president, he's detrimental to what he's trying to do. I don't feel like he's trying to manipulate people, doing it on purpose, or whoever said that. I feel like he is weak. That's a sign of weakness. He knows he shouldn't be tweeting these things. And it worries me because he says he's a smart person, but it's clear to everybody that this is not helping him. And to me, I mean, I would think the whole reason why I was okay voting with him is because I believed he was going to surround himself with the right people. And I'm pretty sure the people around him are telling him that you need to stop doing this.
Do you think he doesn't listen to the people who surround him?
Yes, and that's what worries me. So he's either not as smart as he says he is, or how I want to believe he is, or he's not listening to these people, because I'm sure they're telling him that. And if he's not listening to them on that, it does worry me for what might happen in the future, that he might not listen to them.
And we'll be back in a moment. This week was the one-year anniversary of a presidential election that turned out differently than many observers expected. In the news business, it has been a year of discussion about what we missed. Hopefully, this has led to humility and improvement. Fewer breaking news alerts for day-old news, fewer peekaboo headlines that don't pay off when you read the story, and more explanation and better reporting that helps people understand the world around them. But the anniversary of the unexpected outcome was also an echo of the unexpected outcomes of the presidential elections of 1824, 1948, 1980, and 2000. All a reminder that the very nature of the news business is surprise. The news is what surprises us. It's why journalism is called the first draft of history. Embedded in journalism is the fact that the story will change. Human events are complex, and understanding evolves. In the last year, there has been a fight over this fact, a fight over the nature of meaning. Those who would like to control information try to use the changing nature of recording human events to raise doubts about all reporting on human events. That way, they can clear the market to peddle their story without competition and label anything they don't like as fake news. This is an age-old conflict in America between a free press working to gather facts and explanations and a government which prefers people believe their story because it's more efficient that way. But working out the truth of things is messy. Several shifting versions is confusing, but that's a feature, not a bug. It's the pluralism we call democracy. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. On this Veterans Day weekend, our thanks go out to all of you who served the country and to your families. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.